Anyway, it's wonderful to see you guys today, and it's awesome to be back in this church after so many years. I don't know how long ago it was since I was here, but it was, I think, maybe 10 years or something. Okay, so wonderful to see you, and just want to congratulate the alumni who qualified yesterday. So proud of you guys. I'm amazed at all the things that you've achieved with all that study. It's amazing stuff, so well done. And also, it's just so gratifying with some of you who studying the KI content that Dr. Barron referred to, because that's in those modules, and when we come and shake hands, you all say, hey, thanks, Dave, for the love your stuff. That's really gratifying, because we kind of forget, where did all the content go around the world? We don't really pay much attention, just get on with fighting the war. And so it's good to hear that. Dr. Barron, Dr. Lisa Gilfin, I just want to, and the faculty of Vision University, International University, I just want to thank you so much for bestowing on me yesterday an honorary doctorate. And I was completely taken by surprise. He knew if he'd have told me beforehand, I wouldn't have been here. So he never told me, told everyone else. But I was deeply humbled, and thank you so much. Okay, so, and finally, a huge welcome to my KI chapter leaders who've come here today from all over the place. It's awesome to have you guys with us. Looking forward to hanging out with you hooligans tomorrow. Okay, so I've got 2 lessons to teach you guys. One now, obviously, and then another one this afternoon. And this message is going to span both of those lessons. So you won't hear the end of it if you take off after lunch. So, see, you're going to have to stay. So, Dr. Barron asked me to explain a bit about KI, about modern-day sheep nations, and then go on to discuss that story that he just mentioned a few minutes ago about restoring kings in the marketplace. And the reasoning behind it, it's not a random thing. There's a good reason, and just you'll follow through the story, and you'll see how God arranges things. There's no coincidences. They're all God incidences. He's sovereign. He's in charge. And if he can get us to listen to him through raising our intimacy levels with him, amazing, amazing things will happen. Okay, so that's the key to what we're talking about here. But out of that, from a bankruptcy from that guy to the formation of a new company within our group with him, to now being one that company being in a top 500 in the nation by net asset value. Okay, so amazing story of restoration, $5 billion company. All right, and then Barron also asked me to introduce you to the concept of modern-day sheep nations rising via the implementation of applied biblical economics, and this will really, truly amaze you, and that'll be more this afternoon. Okay, so with that then, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about KI, because most of you know enough about it, but it started in 2024 when my pastor asked me to just start a local church ministry to train the entrepreneurs to help fund the church. He actually said to me, you're going to die one day, Dave. Who's going to fund the church when you're dead? Can you open a ministry? That's him. And we're mates, because his daughter married my son. She stalked him. Okay, so we changed the model of local church business ministries from the Saturday morning or Friday morning breakfast and so on to a Thursday night, and we did all sorts of ways of getting people coming in. The whole church came, and I wanted to narrow it down just to get the entrepreneurs. And I introduced a new genre of ministry, and I think that's why the Lord grew it, because it's a ministry that I learnt, or a genre of ministry that I learnt as a brand new Christian in 1986-ish. About trying to get into the head of the author of the scripture. I just found so many, ambiguous commentaries on the same scripture when I was a new Christian. I just couldn't cope with that, so I wanted to find out, so what did that person mean? What was going on around them geographically, historically? Were they captives at the time? Were they a free nation? What was going on in Egypt and the rest of the Middle East and North Africa? So when you learn all of that, you can put it into a perspective, and then you can bring it into the modern world. And that was what I was teaching, and I was able to teach from experience, because by then we had about a $300 million company, and it had grown from zero to over a $100 million company in 2 years and 7 months, because the Lord put his favor on it, okay? Not my skills. I only ever settled at $2 million. So I had the proof of concept and was able to teach the new genre without a challenge to any great extent. All right, so that attracted a lot of business people, and it spread. It got too big for our church. People were coming up from different cities around us, and I think it was Pastor Suzette who came to me one day. She was bringing bunches of people up from the Gold Coast, and she said to me, you know, we're a bunch of people all coming up to see you through the traffic hours and everything. You're only one, why don't you come down there? And so I went to my pastor and said, hey, Dan, you know, this is what this pastor said. And 3 other pastors had said the same thing from much, much bigger churches. I said, what am I supposed to do? And he said, you go with Suzette. She's a gatherer. She's the one bringing people, and she believes in what you guys are doing, so that you go there. So we did. So Pastor Suzette had the first KI chapter outside of our church. And then that grew, and then other chapters formed all over the country, and then it spread internationally. It spread, God grew it organically. I never, ever volunteered to speak anywhere. I never asked to speak anywhere because I don't like public speaking. I don't mind it. I'm not scared of audiences. I just don't like being the center of attention. When you're trained in the SAS, it's all about being covert and clandestine, not standing out saying, shoot me, you know. Okay, so anyway, that's the sort of history of that, and I'll take that on into the second phase of sheep nations and so on this afternoon, because I've got a little clock running over here to get you into the story of restoring the kings, and then we'll go on to the second bit, the Savo, depending on how far we get. What I'm about to tell you now is on the KI membership site, kingdominitiatives.au, and it's a lesson called When Intimacy Leads to Obedience, the Results Are Astounding. Okay, so if you ever get time, log on to that and watch that video, or I think it might be a series of 2 videos. That's the most amazing thing. Okay, so one of the key teachings of KI is that now keep in mind, KI is ostensibly teaching business people, entrepreneurs and so on, initially how to fund their churches, because their church is their spiritual covering, and you want a strong spiritual covering, so that was the core. So, but from then on, once you have the covering, engage in your assignment, because you're going to need that covering, because it's going to be mission impossible. You need some spiritual eyes watching your back in the marketplace. So that was a big deal. But then moving on into raising your own intimacy levels with the Lord. How on earth will you ever know your assignment if you don't have intimacy with the Lord and you can't hear his voice in great detail? You must get detail on your assignment. Okay, look at Noah. You're going to build an ark, dude. Well, there's a lot of detail that God gave him. And Solomon, you're going to build a temple. Well, David got all the architectural plans for that. Because he was so intimate with the Father, he was able to take literally those plans and give them to his son and say, right. And then even the Lord showed him he's got to get all the builders ready, he's got to get the captains of industry ready, the funding, everything that David knew how to do to hand it all over to Solomon, okay? So that's the essence of the intimacy, and that's why we teach that all of the business people must take a day off every week to go and pray, okay? Whole day. And we call it a pray day. And a pray day is a word now. Thousands and thousands of people all over the world. You know, we have chapters, I think it's about 130 chapters of KI all over the world in just so many countries. And there's pray days happening in all these countries. And it's an amazing thing. When you Google pray day, all sorts of stuff comes up. But it's now a word. So when you go out on a pray day, you get so saturated because the objective is to find out what is the Lord's will for you. It's not Pentecostal rakashanga swinging from the palm trees, right? It's all about hearing God's will and listening to his voice and however you hear from the Lord. Okay, so back in 2006 or late 06, 07, I was out on a pray day and I was sort of quizzing the Lord, why does it take so long for these kings to do their assignments? And I was kind of perplexed about, I'm teaching on assignment, it's not that hard to find it, but then they don't do it for reasons unbeknown to me, and so on. I was whinging about it to the Lord. And I said, Lord, it's even happened long ago. Look at Joseph. It took him 13 years. From the time he got the dreams, he knew his assignment, 13 years, before he became treasurer. David, look how long it took after he was anointed. Look how long he took before he became king of Judah and then the united Israel. That took a long time. And then I said, in my own case, I was 43 when I got my assignment, and then and the Lord only gave it to me in bits and pieces, and I was 55 when he gave me the whole thing to create the world's first modern day sheep nation in Australia. Okay, so why, like, that's so long to do? And I'm an entrepreneur. I want things done the day before yesterday, you know. And I felt the Lord showing me it was because it takes such a long time to train the kings, to get them to be righteous with power and wealth, to get them to test themselves, because God knows He doesn't need to test us. We're testing us for our own benefits, okay, and then release us on our assignments. And that takes a long time to understand the intimacy, to get all the training, to understand how to get Babylon out of your business and out of your world, out of your culture, business culture, and so on. And the Lord was kind of indicating to me, you should understand this. How long did they take to train you in the SAS compared to the infantry battalions? Okay, it was you were so specialized by the time you finished your training, and you were so valuable to the unit because they'd spent so much money on you that they really wanted you to succeed, and they didn't want you to get shot. Everything they did was absolutely crazy. The assignments were nonsense, off the planet stupid, but we prevailed. Who dares wins? But the point is, the training is what allowed us to do that. So the point was, the kingdom of God cannot afford to lose its kings. By the time they're released into the marketplace on assignment, they are trained, and they have been trained for sometimes decades. Okay? So the issue was, I don't want my kings to collapse. Now the GFC, do you remember the global financial crisis? That was now biting, taking hold. Christian businesses were collapsing all over the world. We were lecturing all over the world. And I was watching this, and the Lord was saying, I don't want my kings to lose their faith because their businesses collapse. You must teach on this. So I was teaching on that first. I always taught first at the Sunshine Coast, which is the center of the world, as you guys would know. America is just a satellite of Australia. And so I always teach there first so that my pastor can listen. He attends every KI. And he was listening, and so on. Then the next one was the Gold Coast, and then so on around the country. We teach the message. Okay, so that was the whole thing that I was doing at the time. So we had 2 finance companies in our group of companies, and one day one of them. Keep in mind what I'm teaching. Okay, so I'm just giving you background. And then one day one of these companies receives a loan application for $6 million. And that's above the discretion of my credit committee, so they brought it to me and said, Dave, have a look at this. So I checked it out, and I just thought, that's not a loan application. That is an SOS. This business is going to collapse. So I threw it in the bin and filed it neatly in the rubbish bin, and that was the end of it. And I forgot about it. So a few days later, I was lecturing for a very high-level Christian lobby group, the Australian Christian Lobby, the ACL, most powerful Christian group in the nation. And this group the managing director was a guy called Brigadier Jim Wallace. He commanded the Australian Special Forces. He was in the SAS, and eventually commanded all the mechanized divisions, was 4th in charge to take over the armed forces. So I knew him well, and we were pretty close, still are pretty close. We hit it off well. So when he spoke, I listened, is what I'm getting to. And he said to me, after I finished lecturing at one of his functions, he came to me and said, Dave, do you know John Dingermans in Australia, in Tasmania? Tassie is our southern state, island state. And I said, no. And he said, well, you guys think alike, you should meet. You need to meet John. So I'm thinking, awesome. John and I, we're going to make some money for the kingdom. So, yep, we'll meet John. And then about 3 or 4 weeks later, I was lecturing at University of Queensland on the Compass program, and David Yates was managing that, and he's listening. And David Yates was Jim Wallace's chief of staff, okay, so he's also an important dude. And he comes to me and says, Dave, have you know John in Tassie? I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, you guys think alike, I should do an intro. Now, I'm thinking, okay, we're going to make twice as much money, this is looking good. And then a few weeks later, this time a lady came to me. I was lecturing afterwards, and she said, do you know John in Tassie? And I'm thinking, come on, Lord, what's going on? And she said, you guys think alike. Okay, awesome, we're going to make 3 times as much money. So I went home and did some research on John Dingemans and found that he was a very, very strategic Christian. He was heading up the ACL, the Australian Christian Lobby, for the state of Tasmania. He was the state director. He had a multi-million-dollar company. His assignment was to help churches become profitable community centres, and he was doing his assignment, and just exactly what you would expect from a strategic king in the marketplace. And when I use the word king, gender neutral, okay? Kings, queens, I'm just talking about captains of industry or even small to medium enterprises, okay? Anyway, shortly after that, John phoned me, or his PA phoned me and said, will you come and talk at the state summit that we're holding? And I thought, wow, God's pulling strings. Yep, awesome, yes, I'll talk. And I thought, okay, when we finish talking, we'll go and have dinner together and we'll have a chat about making 3 times as much money. And we did exactly that. So I spoke at his summit. It was very high level, lots of state ministers there and federal ministers and so on. Anyway, and then we went for dinner afterwards, and it's just him and his wife and me, and we're having a private dinner, we're chatting, and so I just opened the conversation and said, hey John, how's business, you know? And he just opened up, and he said, it's not very good, Dave. And I said, well, what do you mean? And so he told me. Now, he was under attack. His whole business was under attack, and it was nothing to do with the global financial crisis. It was due to unrighteous pastors who were ripping him off, literally, okay? And, you know, so he explained it all to me, and he was under threat of being foreclosed upon. The banks were moving in, the creditors were moving in, court cases were starting to happen. It was about to implode. And I was listening, and I said, hang on a second, do you have a $6 million loan application out there? And he said, yes, have you got it? And I said, no, it's gone down the council tip. I threw it away. And I realized then that God had sent me there to rescue this dude, because I was teaching the kingdom of God cannot afford to lose its kings. And here's this very significant king. We're not going to make 3 times as much money. We're going to lose 3 times as much money. You, Hodgson, need to do what you are preaching and teaching, and this is what that led to. So that pray day all those months ago this was why, okay? And so I had to make a decision about what are we going to do? Am I going to try to rescue this guy or not? Now I want to impress upon you guys to hear that kind of instruction when your assignment is vertical and God wants to send you laterally to do something which he's trained you to do over the years, which doesn't look like a good idea. You really need to know that you're hearing from the Lord properly, okay? You need to know that the Lord has told you to do this so that you don't sacrifice your assignment. You must be intimate. This is why these pray days are absolutely critical. You can't live without them. That's a threatening sort of a statement, but I'm just telling you, I certainly can't. And definitely running a big group of companies and fighting with the regulators and the tax office and the whole world against you, you need to be taking pray days, okay? Anyway, even the thing here, even if it comes down to your last dollar, you must know that it's from the Lord. So I get to that stage now, and I say to my board, I say, guys, this is what's happening. You guys all attend KI, you know what we've been teaching. So we need to use company money to rescue this bloke. And they said, no, we have our own battles, and I'll come to that in just a second. So not happening. Okay, so we actually weren't equally yoked in business. They were Christians, I was a Christian. Equally yoked doesn't mean nothing to do with being of the same faith. Lots of Christians are crooks, and you're not equally yoked if you're yoked to a crook. Now, these guys weren't crooks, okay? They just weren't up there with the vision. So we were unequally yoked in terms of vision and commitment and taking risk for the kingdom of God. So I said to them, okay, well, I'll use private money, but I need to use the company stationery. I'm going to have to write to the banks that are pursuing this guy. I have credibility. I'm an international financier by then. We're a big company. And we've got finance companies. We can say that we're going to give him a bridging loan and all sorts of things. And they said, fine, you use a company stationery, but no money. So that was the position that I was in at that point in time, to rescue this king. Now, at that time, our own circumstances as a company, keep in mind the global financial crisis was biting, and a lot of banks were getting into trouble because wholesale funding had dried up around the world from the central banks. So our fifth biggest bank in Australia, I won't name it because I had to agree not to when we eventually nose-to-nose fought this out. But we're building a big development, $22 million boat storage thing down in Sydney, and we'd put in $3 million, the bank had put in $19 million, going swimmingly well, no problem at all, except the bank got into trouble. They had too much exposure to commercial funding, not enough to residential, so the reserve central banks, in fact it was a European central bank, said to them, we won't give you any more wholesale money, or we'll give it to you, but it'll be really expensive unless you reduce your exposure to commercial funding. So they just called in all their loans, and they called in our loan. Now we're halfway through a project, a construction project. You can't refinance halfway through, it's impossible. And ultimately, the bank demanded payment, and they said, if you don't pay, we'll foreclose. So we went and had a big argument with them about it. They don't want to argue. They bring their lawyers. They're cowards, the two directors of this bank. It's a big bank. It's our fifth bank. Anyway, I argued with these two lawyers, and eventually they said, we're going to foreclose. And they don't care who they trash, don't care that we've done nothing wrong. Anyway, they took possession of the construction site, and fire sold it for next to nothing. And I think there was about 14 or 15 million left to pay them from memory. And then they said, you've got 1 month to pay $14 million. And we didn't have that. So so that was why my board didn't want to help John Dingermans. Okay, we needed every cent. So that's the background, and now John's crisis is coming to a head. Everything's closing in on him, and he's starting to panic and so on. And he came to me and said, Dave, we've got to do something. So I started working with the banks. His banks were different to mine, writing them letters saying, look, we're working on overseas funding for this, just give us a bit of time. And they did, purely because we had the clout and the credibility. So that's exactly why they gave us a bit more time. And then that sort of lasted for about a month or so. It was very difficult to raise money for anything, and eventually they got impatient, and the creditors all moved in on John. So I had to get his house, his $800,000 house, which was going to get repossessed by the bank, because I was a finance guy and understood the credit policies that banks didn't even know they had anymore. I managed to buy his house and sell it to his son. His son actually paid, and I did a simultaneous settlement, because if he sold it direct to his son, it's not at arm's length. The bank can still repossess it. So I bought it, and in a fraction of a second sold it to his son with his son's money. Okay, and you've got to know that sort of stuff to be able to do it. This is part of your life's training for your assignment and so on. So I did that, and then we needed to get the shares of his company into his son's name, all sorts of jockeying and jostling, and eventually I was down to my last $134,000, which doesn't sound, which might sound like a lot to some people, but in a big group of companies, it's like about a day and a half of expenses, and then it's gone. 134 grand, that was all we had left, and it was private money. And so I went to my wife and said, Merlene, we have to you have to use this for John in order to get this thing finished off. And she said, but that's all we've got left. I said, well, that's what the Lord's told us to do. She said, well, I trust that you hear from the Lord, so we'll do it. Now, his mentor, his financial mentor, who charges him $6,000 a month, phoned me and said, Dave, don't do that. You'll never get it back. He's gone. And I said, I wouldn't mention his name. I just said, dude, that's not what the Lord's told me, and we must take the risk for the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God cannot afford to lose this bloke. And he said, well, you're writing that money or throwing it after bad. Anyway, I still used it and went after it, and paid for everything that needed to be paid for. We managed to save the business. It was grossly reduced. They released a lot of staff. This crooked pastor managed to take some of the business, and the rest of it survived in his son's name. John had to declare bankruptcy, but the house was saved. I then took him to an expert who wasn't a lawyer, but he was a real expert in getting people out of bankruptcy. He can do it in 6 months. So within 6 months, John was out again, okay, and free of all debt, and was able to start rebuilding, and still had his house. And we went away from there battered and bruised and financially bruised, but we'd done the assignment that the Lord had told us to do, and we not only saved this king, but we set him up for complete restoration. Okay, so that's the beginning of this story. But remember, this crooked bank was still after us. Okay, and it was bearing down on us now. Now we've done the thing for the Lord, and now here comes this monster after us again. And I call it a crooked bank because it is a crooked bank, okay? I know that from dealing with them, lying and cheating and so on. Nevertheless, it was bearing down on us. Now, there's another part to this story, okay? And we've still got time, so I'll add this in for you because it's all going on at the same time. And I want you to know that this is what is required of the kings in the marketplace. When you are so committed to the kingdom, you know you've heard from the Lord that you will do this thing for God. He always uses people. I mean, he can sovereignly just press his head down on the people that were after John and say, "You're crooks, leave him alone." But he doesn't. He uses people, okay? It's all in his strategy. We cohabit and we co-labor with Jesus, right? So this is co-laboring. So one of our finance companies a few years earlier had lent money to two Christians. One was a pastor in Fiji, who was a native Fijian but Australian, but he had a church in Fiji of about 800 people, 800 to 1,000 people. The other one was a Christian business guy who used to come to KI. He was a New Zealander, Kiwi. Okay. Now these guys had been awarded a $2 million contract with a Fijian telco company, and they needed money to get on with it. So we raised the capital for them through investors, and then there was a coup in Fiji. So all the investors said, no, we don't want our money to go there. But they had now committed to the actual contract, and they needed to put deposits down and so on. So we raised the capital from other investors who were willing to take the risk. So it was expensive money, and we did it for free. We never charged them because it would have been too expensive. But we had to take security, so we had to take security on property, and then they went ahead and got stuck in. And that went very, very well for about 18 months. But then the pastor ripped off the telco, okay? So those of you who were at Tamara's KBA yesterday, I mentioned getting crooked Christians, and trying. Our biggest challenge is getting the crook out of the Christian as at KI, and this is just an example. Okay, so here now these guys, the payments back to us and then back to the investors dries up. Because now they're not paying anymore because the pastor has ripped off the telco for about $500,000 worth of materials that he sold privately. And of course the telco pulls the pin on the contract, and now they're stranded and they can't pay us, and it's just a mess. So I gave them a lot of grace to try and get it all done and find a way, and they couldn't. So the Aussie guy the Kiwi, he sold his property and paid us back half of the money, which was fine. And I heard a few months later that he was really struggling financially. So I phoned him and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, we used up all the money to pay you and this and that." And I thought, well, this is a righteous guy. So we gave him a big chunk of money back as a gift, okay, to get him started again. So he was restored, all right? And then the other guy, the pastor, now he's supposed to sell his house, and he's got lots of houses all over Fiji and in Australia. He's a wealthy dude, and he refuses. He denies being party to the loan. Okay, now he's signed the loan documents, given guarantees, been paying interest for 18 months. Suddenly he's not party to the loan. He gets his lawyers in Fiji, and they say that this Aussie guy, he's ex-SAS, he's threatening me, threatening my life, and all this rubbish, it was never any arguing or anything. He was very polite about the whole gig. And so at the end of the day, he went to court in Fiji, and the day before it goes to court, there's political unrest in the country, and all the judges were fired. They were all sacked by the government, okay? So it doesn't go to court anymore. And it just fell silent. So we got this crooked bank trying to chase us. Now we've got this this big loan over here not coming in. We're already bruised and battered from rescuing John, and now here's this crooked pastor ripping us off as well. So all of this is going on at once, at the same time. And I heard that this pastor was coming back to Australia and he'd stopped communicating with me. So I can't remember how he did it because it was a long time ago, but eventually he texted me and said, yes, I'm coming to Australia. I want to come and talk to you to negotiate. So I said, do that. So he came into my office over the weekend. We negotiated a 20-year payment plan. It was like $50 or $80 a month or something crazy with no interest, just pay back the principal. So he says, oh, awesome, and he goes down, thank you, Dave, and I've sinned and all this rubbish. And he goes back to Fiji and goes to the police and tells them I cornered him in my office and threatened to kill him. Okay? So, this is the kind of guy he is. He's a pastor with a church of 800 people and so on. Anyway, eventually, the police got hold of the lawyers and got hold of me and said, you've got to leave him alone and stop this nonsense and everything. And I'd never, ever even discussed that. But the point is, he needed to come back to Australia, and I heard he'd snuck back in. And so I heard he was at a church, because I've been lecturing at all these churches for years. So all the pastors, I know all of them. And I heard he's lecturing at this one church. And he's rising up through the ranks of the church, and he's like an assistant pastor. So I phoned the lead pastor and said, hey, do you know this bloke's a crook? I just want you to know, because, your mantle's covering him. And they asked him a few questions. Oh, well, this and that. And they sacked him. Then he went to another church, and he's a very good pastor, and he rises up quickly. And eventually I phoned that pastor. It happened twice. And then I finally was homing in on catching him and bringing him to justice. And then I felt the Lord saying to me, and I knew that once I'd exposed him, his ministry was finished. Okay, church would collapse in Fiji, and he would never be a pastor again. So I felt the Lord getting my attention, saying, what are you doing? How long has it taken me to train that king? And he's a king priest. He's an entrepreneurial pastor. And what is the value that you put on this guy, the king priest? What is the value? He owes you about $200,000, and you're going to destroy him. He's more valuable than that. And so I thought about it. I said, yeah, you're right, Lord. He's always right, unfortunately. So I'm thinking, well, how, we've got no money, you've got to pay these investors and all this sort of stuff. And so I thought, well, I have to pardon this creature. And so I left a message on his text. He was hiding from me. And I said, I'll tell you what, you come to my office, you bring your wife, because I don't think she knows. I met her, she's a very elegant lady, Aussie girl. And I just knew she was above this sort of stuff. I said, you bring your wife, I want her to hear. I want you to confess and repent, and I'll set you free. And he thought it was a trap, so he just wouldn't do it. And eventually I texted his wife, and she said, what's going on? And he lied to her, but eventually she compelled him to come. So he came to my house, my home office, and he was very, very sheepish. And he thought, this guy's going to erupt or something, or it was a trap, and he was looking for police cars outside. And he came in, and I said to him, okay, tell your wife what you've done. That was it. You tell her what you've done, and as long as you stick to the truth, I will pardon everything. And he looked at me in complete disbelief, and he told her everything from go to woe. And she just sat there shaking her head. I thought, geez, I'm glad I don't want to go home with you two. But she could not believe what he was doing, so the hypocrisy and everything else. So he eventually finished the confession, and he was looking down at his feet. And I said, okay, the loan is forgiven, and you can go. And he stood there. What? Do you mean it? I said, yeah, go and fight with her. Off you go. That's a bigger battle. Anyway, he cried, and he said, I want to pay it back. I said, don't pay it back. Off you go. So he went away. And, he started coming to the Gold Coast KI, Pastor Suzette's KI, the very next month. He was sitting at the back. He was a very quiet dude, never said much. There's a social time during KI meetings. He never said much. He sat at the back. But he came every time. And he texted me after each meeting and said, wow, I didn't know. what I was doing was, I just thought it was good business and, all this kind of rubbish. But at the end of the day, he learned so much. And then he kept me informed. He said, Dave, I'm buying second-hand clothes from the second-hand shops. I'm taking them back to the shops in Fiji and selling them for really cheap to the Fijians. And I said, okay, and I hope it's all righteous and above board. He said, absolutely, so many homeless there, all this stuff. And it became a big business. And he was completely restored. And, it was so amazing to watch what he was doing in this whole thing. Now, keep in mind, we still had this crooked bank bearing down on us, okay? And eventually, here's the most amazing thing, guys, because I had now pardoned his debt, okay? And the Lord's Prayer, Matthew 6:12, you guys know it backwards, but the most popular version of it, which is King James, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. Okay, so I've pardoned this guy's debt. Didn't need to. He's a total crooked pastor, but look how he got restored, and did it because the Lord said, you cannot afford to lose the kings. And I'm leading the kings in Australia. Okay, this is the most significant, influential marketplace ministry by far in our nation in terms of national vision and so on. And so here's me trying to crucify one of the kings for 200 grand. And yet we're teaching the opposite, okay? So now that's all done, and here's this bank suddenly forecloses on us, gives us 4 days to pay $14 million, sends 2 letters, one to me, one to Merlene, she empties the letterbox to our house, opens it, that feeling in your stomach, you've got to give us 14 million, we're going to shut you down. And the bank's more crooked than the pastor. So by then I'd had enough of these baboons, and so I went down there, I took my lawyer, and they had their lawyers. They on the 18th floor in Brisbane. It's their own building, and nose to nose fought with these mongrels. And, I just knew that the Lord was with us because we were righteous in business. We're not, we're all sinners, but when we're talking about biblical economics, it's righteousness with power and wealth. Okay, not goody two-shoes greeting everybody at the door at church. That's all very nice. This is the war zone in the marketplace. It's a different concept. Okay, so that's what happened. Now, the 2 directors of the bank, the 2 senior directors are sitting there, and the 2 lawyers are sitting here, and I'm standing there with my lawyer, and eventually the lawyers are standing up, and we're fighting, and, arguing about it. They're at fault, and, we've done nothing wrong. And it was very aggressive, and these clowns had left the window open. I was contemplating clean and jerking one of these creatures out that window from the 18th floor to see how he bounced. But that's how so angry I was, and it's not a Christian thing, but it was just a war zone. But at the end of the day, we, shouting at each other, and I said to the directors, you guys, what have you got to say for yourselves? And they said, oh, well, that's why we have lawyers. And I said, you are corporate cowards. And this is our 5th bank with the 2 major directors, and they never said a word. They're sitting there terrified, and the developer was with us as well. Anyway, we whittled it down from 14 mil, went down to 12 mil, down to 10, 8, 6, 5, and they said, well, we will settle for 3 million. I said, you'll settle for nothing. You're getting nothing from us. Went all the way down to $500,000, and then they said, we will not go below 500,000. You give us 500 grand, and we'll write off the 14 million. I grabbed the developer and said, you're as crooked as these creatures. You pay them the 500 grand. And he said, okay, no more fighting. And so he said, I'll pay. And then as we walked out, because the bank was holding my guarantee until he paid, and he had 2 months to pay, and I grabbed him and I said, you go back in there and you tell him you're going to pay them tomorrow. And he said, I can't, it's going to take about 3 weeks. I said, okay, 3 weeks max. And so he went back in and negotiated that, and he came out and he said, it's done. So we walked away from $14 million from the crooked bank because we pardoned the debt of a king, okay? And I'm going to add something to this because this will amaze you, and then I'll go on to what happened with John Dingermans, how that became a $5 billion company. Okay, this is all true stories, which I'm trying to remember because Berin wanted me to talk about it. So I was trying to figure it out until 2:30 this morning and work in Australian time. And so anyway, I've got it right. So basically what happened with that crooked pastor, after that, I was asked to lecture at University of Queensland on the Compass program with David Yates, who was one of the guys who said, you've got to meet John. And he said, we're talking, Dave, this lecture is all about situational ethics, and what do you do when you confront crooked unrighteousness or corruption in the marketplace? Now, geez, I'm an authority on that. So he said, can you lecture on that? And we've got all the students, there's about 100 students doing this Compass program. And when you talk, they break up into groups and then they comment. And when they finish discussing it, you pass the mic around and find out what they would do if they were business people under those circumstances, Christian business people. So I said, awesome, I got a plan. So I phoned up Alan, the crooked pastor, who's now a righteous pastor and a powerful business guy. And I said, you willing to come and do something for me? And he explained what I wanted, and he said, yeah, I'd love to. So I said, okay, this is going to blow these students off the planet, because I want impact, okay? I want people to remember stuff, and it happens with these jolting stories. So we go to Compass, and I take Alan with me. I didn't introduce him. I just said, this is Pastor Alan. And we're sitting around, and they asked me, the other lecturers, because there's about 6 of us, what are you going to talk about, David? And I said, I'm going to talk about this crooked pastor who ripped us off and all that sort of stuff. And they said, oh, what hypocrisy, he should have been drawn and quartered and all that thing. He's sitting with us at the table. Anyway, it was my turn to lecture, so I told the story of what happened. And I said to the students, now, you guys break up into your groups. You decide what you would do under these circumstances. I never told them what I would do. I just told them how he ripped us off and lied and everything else. And, what would you now do if you had captured this guy in Australia? And so it passed it around, and then they, one by one, they got up. And all the guys said, well, he should be crucified, and we should hang this dude, and such hypocrisy. And all the girls got up and said, well, maybe a bit of forgiveness, but he should probably go to jail and all this sort of thing. And so we passed around, so I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what I did, and then I'll see if that pastor will tell you what he did. So I told him what I did, and they're looking around thinking, what's this? And then I told them, and I said, hey, Alan, will you get up and tell them what you did? And they just all hung there with their mouths open. And Alan got up there, and he took the thing, and he told them what happened for his side, from the time that I pardoned him, and how it went on to build these big shops selling second-hand clothes and so on in Fiji. His church was restored, it's growing, all that sort of stuff. They were in tears. The impact was so profound upon them. This is the restoration and the teaching of restoring all things. And it was so amazing. Okay, so now there's 15 minutes left, so I'll tell you what happened with John. Is this okay? You're not falling asleep? It's all right? Okay, so John now is rebuilding his business, and it's coming really well. And John is kind of Mr. Sustainable in Tasmania. He's got all these sustainability projects going on, and he's got on his wall, when you walk in, there's no wall space left. It's all certificates and awards and things like that. And so there's a coal mining company comes to him and says, I want you to be the surface project manager for the coal mine that we're going to open up. It's an old mine closed in the 60s. We're going to open it up and produce coal and sell it and for electricity. Now, this is 2011. Climate change activism is very aggressive and so on. But John knows that my vision was to clean up coal, because coal is our biggest export in Australia, and we cannot afford to lose our biggest export. We're trying to create a sheep nation. If we lose our biggest export, we're going to be a banana republic, literally, okay? Won't work. So we can clean up coal. We can certainly generate electricity with no emissions from burning the coal if we will sacrifice some profit for the planet. Okay? It's entirely doable. Greed is why the planet is being plundered. If you believe in climate change, it doesn't make any difference. We needed to save. We have a national vision. We could not let our coal industry collapse. There would be no energy security left in the nation. No point in having armed forces if you don't have energy security. It's number one security. All right? So that he knew my vision. One day, he came into my office. We were in the middle of an audit of our public company, and our computers had crashed, and we'd lost 3 days of audit data. So I didn't need anybody coming in the door to have a chat. John arrives and says, Dave, I've got the perfect thing for a vehicle for us now to save the coal industry. You know, there's a coal mine and they want about 20 million to get it up and running and to get all the EPAs and all the approvals to get mining. Is good money to be made. And he said, I'm the surface project manager and so on. Now, the guy who does the most due diligence is a project manager, and I'm busy with the auditors in my boardroom and everything's panicked because it's all closed. I said, yes, do it. And they wanted 20 million. And I said, yes, but we're going to trickle feed it in. I haven't got time. Off you go. So he said, done. And off he went. And I just signed. So he went away back to the mining company and said, okay, Paladin, which is my company, will put in the 20 mil, but they're going to trickle feed it. So for 20 mil, these guys have valued their company at 100 mil, which is fictitious. We put 20 mil in, we'll get a fifth of the company, because it'll be 120 mil, we get a fifth, 20%. Okay, so fine. So once we finished all the audit, we get back on with John and we start having a good look at this thing. And I said, okay, we're going to trickle feed $6 million in, and we agreed to all of this with the company, and we'll use that to get all the approvals, and then we'll give you the balance, because then it's worth more. So keep in mind, they value the company at 100 mil, and we're putting in 20. We irrevocably signed up, so which means you can now value it for 120 mil. But there's nothing there, okay? It's just a balance sheet value. So we then use all that money to get all the approvals. We get a mining lease issued for 1 million tons per annum, and we get it valued $420 million. Proper valuation. Suddenly our 20 million is worth 100 million. Okay, so 500%. This came from John. You guys think alike. You got to meet John. You blokes think alike. So here we are, to take over this mine so that we can prove we can save our coal industry. All driven by vision, not driven by profit. There will be profit, but it's driven by vision for the nation, which is my assignment. John's is quite similar. So here we are working for the Lord, okay? And we went on and eventually, with 20%, we're not going to be able to control this mine. We started to realize that these owners of this mine are crooks. They're spiriting the money away. They're not doing what it's supposed to be, but we had very little control. So we eventually, nobody else would fund it, so I started to withhold the funds to put pressure on these crooked dudes. You must either get Babylon out of your business or make it righteous, okay? Don't let it fester in your businesses. So in this case, we decided to keep him because he owned more than us. Excuse me. And then we went and negotiated because he couldn't get any more money from anybody. Climate change activism was stopping the banks and everybody funding. We thought we could, so we negotiated for 50% of the mine plus a casting vote for $71 million, and they agreed. Took us 10 years to raise that $71 million. Came at a cost of over $200 million. But we did it, and then we took over the mine. And when we took over the mine, which still hadn't started mining, we found that lots of money had gone. We went to him and said, come, sit. We want 80% for that money because you've used it with inflated consulting fees to, buy high-heeled shoes for your missus. So at the end of the day, we said, if you don't, we're going to do it. We investigate the books. And he said, okay. And so we got 80% for it. So now we own 80% of $400 million coal mine, okay, for the 71 mil. And then the lawyer who was the corporate attorney came to me and he said, now that you guys are in charge, I've been the corporate attorney for 10 years, they've never paid me. And they never paid anybody. And we knew that because we'd started paying this guy, the lawyer, halfway through because we realized no one was paying anybody. So we started paying money and took it out of the 71 million, which drove them crazy. But it's the kingdom thing to do, to pay people, right? So we did. And so as soon as we took over, he came to us. He said, I have a special coal to hydrogen technology which I want to offer you guys. And I said, why didn't you offer it to the owners all this time ago? We could have funded this. He said, because they're crooks, they would have stolen it. So, wow. And he said, you guys aren't, so I'm offering it to you. Now that led to us turning the coal mine because we needed a technology to clean up coal. So this was a technology where you take the coal, crush it, and put it into these big reactors, no combustion, therefore no emissions, add a few bits and pieces, lime and other stuff, and out comes pure hydrogen, okay, which is clean hydrogen with no emissions. Now that would save the coal industry and about 60,000 jobs and about 15 or 18 regional cities in Australia. So we're now developing that. and now we've got to open the coal mine. So the Greens all coming, the leaders of the Greens party, the left-wing universities, these guys, Mr. Hodgson's opening coal mines, and he's going to destroy the country and all this sort of stuff. It goes on the ABC. The ABC loves me. They're always running programs on me on television. And, it's just everything is all the ABC trashing us. And this Mr. Hodgson says God told him to do this. They all laugh and belittle it, But God's watching all of this stuff. And, I've got 8 minutes left, so I'll get through this bit and then tell you other stuff this afternoon. But you know what? When the ABC was trashing me, ABC saying Mr. Hodgson must be lying. There has to be emissions. You can't create energy from coal without burning it. And then the Professor Bean Counter from the Australian National University, which is our most left-wing, he's interviewed by ABC saying, no, definitely the chemical equations, mass balances, he's lying, must be lying. And I wasn't, okay? And then now comes the leader of the Greens party, and she comes on and says, he has to be lying, there has to be emissions, and so on. Well, there's an old guy watching this. And when they interviewed me, I said, look, it's not only for Australia. The third world, the developing world, is never, ever going to get to net zero without trashing their whole economy. So we are willing to go there and get the stuff discounted out of sight so that they can get to net zero. We don't want to wipe them out because of your stupid policies. Your winds and everything else that doesn't work. So ultimately, there's this guy listening, and he's got a heart for Africa, and he's got a double PhD in pathology. Okay, he knows how the human body works. And he phones me and says, Dave, I've been watching you on TV. And I said, yeah, I'm a film star. And he said, no, I've been watching. And he said, I've done all the equations. I know that you're using lime. I know you don't have to report on it. It's up in your scope 3, but I know you're using it. And in order to get lime, somebody's burning lime upstream from us. So therefore, there are scope 3 emissions, which doesn't matter. But if you want to fix that, I can help you. And I said, awesome. We want to be completely carbon zero so we can prove it can be done. So he brought his patent, and we bought it off him, and he came to contract to us, consult to us, and we looked at this technology that decarbonizes the production of lime. Okay, so it takes the CO2 emissions, mix it with water, and it creates hydrogen. All of a sudden, CO2 is very, very valuable as opposed to being a greenhouse emission. Okay, and so we looked at this, and eventually we said, well, we don't need to open the coal mine. We just bolt this technology onto all the existing power stations, and it'll decarbonize them overnight. And, then there's this hydrogen as a byproduct, which means the hydrogen's free, essentially, because it's a byproduct, okay? And this came straight from the Lord watching the ABC, because this bloke, he said, I gather you guys are Christians because they're talking about what God told you to do. He said, I wouldn't say I'm a Christian, and you can talk to the big fella on my behalf if there's any, you need any information. So he's kind of a quasi-Christian, but didn't want to admit it. That's all changed now, of course. But anyway, so we renamed this as CSEC technology, carbon sequestration technology. When we were building the prototype, Siemens came to us. They were helping with the electronics, digital electronics and the software, and they went back and told their bosses and said, you've got to come and see what these blokes are doing. This technology will decarbonize, takes all the CO2, mixes it with water. The CO2 acts as a catalyst to split the water molecule. Hydrogen's produced and carbonates are produced. Carbonates are very valuable, $800 a ton. We produce 900 kilos per ton of CO2. So you can imagine when you work that out, it's you pay for the whole plant in 2 years, and then you make masses of money out of CO2. Okay? And the reason this guy knew that is a pathologist. He said that's what the human body does with CO2, but in reverse. He said your big fella designed that, and if it didn't work, we'd be dead on our 10th breath. Okay? The CO2 would be poisonous and would kill us. Okay, so that is how it came to us. Siemens had a good look at it. They came and said to me, will you come and present this at our Beyond 1% Summit, which I did, which is the biggest summit in the country on climate change and all that sort of stuff. And they introduced us and said, this is the only global decarbonisation technology in the world. And they said, and more so, it can be profitable. So that's how they introduced me when I addressed a vast summit of all the, fancy dudes. And ultimately, that, we still had the coal mine and we still had the exploration lease. We still had to keep drilling on that. Every time we drilled, the value went up. The CSEC now was so valuable, starting to grow. And ultimately, last year, when we did the final valuation at the end of the EL drilling program, it came in at over $5,000 million. Okay? You and John think alike. Go and restore him so that we can get the Kings back on track. And that's what happened. Okay, so that's just one company in a group of 33 that was the result of being the obedience to the Father, coming from intimacy with the Lord, to be able to hear that sort of thing and to be able to take that incredible risk right down to the last 134,000, hand it over. We're not driven by money, Lord. Your mission, your sum is so much more important than the money. Those are the tools. Yes, we trust you. Let it go. And very soon afterwards, it's literally in the top 50 companies in the nation in terms of net asset value. Okay? So I hope that all makes sense, guys, and we'll talk some more this afternoon. God bless.